Hello, welcome into another episode. I thought it was only fitting for this episode to be about the inner child because the last two episodes were about our relationship to our mother and our relationship to our father. And now it makes sense to explore what inner child actually means, what inner child work is, how it works, how to do it. I want to totally lay that out on the table because it's probably been one of the most profound tools that I have used on my healing journey to becoming more secure, to breaking through different self-sabotage behaviors, limiting beliefs. So much of it comes back to this inner child work. And as I was planning for this episode and writing a little outline, I was searching in my Google Docs the word inner child to see what sort of things I had already written. And interestingly, I came across this document that I wrote in 2021 for a training that I was doing then. So that's 3 years ago now. In the document, I mentioned how inner child work has been a big part of my practice for 2 years before that. So it's been half a decade in the making, and I'm excited to talk about it today. Before we dive in, I want to share with you about a really cool free resource that I created this week, which is a quiz called Which Type of Anxious Attachment Do You Have? Sometimes I call it Which Anxious Attachment Archetype Are You? And this is not to be confused with which type of attachment style do you have. If you're here, you've probably already ruled out the avoidant and the disorganized attachment style. You probably resonate at least mostly with anxious attachment. But what I've seen within all of the women that I've supported in anxious attachment is that within that pattern, there are some very clear sub-patterns. And those sub-patterns show up in different behaviors of anxious attachment showing up, in different nervous system responses. So some people are defaulting into a fight response while some other women are defaulting into a freeze response. And that alone is going to change the trajectory of your healing path immensely. So now that I've noticed these patterns, I really want everyone who is on their healing anxious attachment journey to understand the deeper layers of their own pattern so that you can sort of understand, what this means for your nervous system, your coping behaviors, and find resources that support you accordingly. So there's a link in the show notes for that. I'll mention it again at the end of the episode in case you don't want to distract yourself right now, but it's a pretty easy 12-question multiple choice quiz. In the end, you're going to get your result. We have the distant dreamer, the affection enthusiast, the calm and collected overthinker, and the sensitive soul. And maybe just from hearing the names, you already might have a guess of which you think you are, but the quiz will help you determine. You're going to get a little write-up about what that archetype means and also a video that's about 12 minutes long that teaches you what your path is for healing when this is the archetype that you lean towards. So I'm super excited to have your feedback on that and have you go through it and just give you that deeper level of understanding. So with that being said, let's talk about what we're here to talk about, which is the inner child. So what is the inner child? This is a concept where we start to see some of our subconscious patterns and layers as stuck in time. So because these subconscious responses or beliefs or patterns were formed at a young age, we can start to view them with the maturity and intellectual capacity of a very young child that might be 3 years old or 6 years old or 2 years old. And when I say subconscious patterns, just to break that down even further, it's very common that we hear the metaphor that from age 0 to 7, we are basically a sponge. Whatever we are seeing, interpreting, experiencing is kind of landing in our bodies as the only way, as the truth. And actually, as children, when we are in these developmental years, our brain waves are in a totally different brainwave and brain state than they are as adults. And that brainwave that we're in, I'm pretty sure it's theta, is a very influenceable brainwave to be in because children have no other context other than what they're experiencing. Of course, that's going to land very deeply within us. And it's important as children that we are in this brain state so that we can learn about the world and learn how to exist and learn how to speak and communicate and walk and be. And all of those things are great. But what we're also learning is who and how we need to be in order to get love. And that's sometimes where things can get a little bit tricky, right? Because we are potentially being raised by parents who are in their own traumas, in their own expression, in their own distraction, in their own chaos, whatever it is. And they simply just might not have the capacity or the resources to meet every need that we have as a child. So when we're a child, our main mission is basically to get love, to get attention, to get our needs met. And we'll very quickly start to learn and adapt how we think we need to act in order to pull that off. So I was talking to a client the other day, and she was telling me how she has vivid memories from when she's definitely less than 10 years old, and she was realizing how she could manipulate her stepmom to giving her what she wanted, basically. So she has this conscious understanding that she was learning how to do that. And that makes sense because maybe by age 8, she can start to understand that, oh, there's a pattern here. I can see that with my conscious choice, there is a predictable reaction. But even younger than that, we are being conditioned in the same way, in a way that manipulates our choices to get the reaction that we want. Additionally, our nervous system is also being conditioned deeply in these years. So, number one, while you are in your mother's womb, your nervous system is already being preconditioned based on her state and her stress levels. And this is important because if your mother is actually experiencing a high stress environment, then by feeding you, the fetus, this information, it's preparing your body to be birthed into a high stress environment. And if it was the case of famine or war, that's helpful. But when it's the case of her own perceived stress, her dysregulated nervous system, a toxic dynamic that she's in, then it's basically preparing you, yes, for that, but also teaching your body that the world is unsafe before you are even able to experience it yourself. Then you are birthed into the world, into an environment, into a home environment, and based on what's going on there, your nervous system continues to be conditioned. Your nervous system will learn, is fight response safe for me? Do I get my needs met when I scream and cry and ask for what I want, or do I get my needs met better when I am silent and agreeable? Do I get my needs met better when I just self-isolate? Is that where I feel most protected? So now we're starting to learn which survival response is going to make us feel the most safe. And before we have any comprehension that this is even going on at all, it's deep in our subconscious, locked away, running on autopilot. So now these are the things that drive us into thought patterns and loops and behaviors that at this point as an adult, you can probably see are not ideal for how you want to show up in the world. And this might be the neediness, the feeling desperate for attention or desperate for time. You might have a fear of judgment. It can show up as collapsing, as victim mentality, a lot of need for control, type A sort of hyper individualism, can be a flailing sensation of I can't handle this, I'm just going to collapse here, I'm just going to flail around, panic in environments that you know shouldn't result in panicking. It can result in blaming the world, helplessness, manipulation, seeking validation, getting stuck in loops of sadness, becoming very codependent, being very rigid or closed. It can show up as uncontrollable anger, as overriding our emotions. And as I say this list, it might sound a little overwhelming, but at the same time, there's been something that I see as so freeing to me and also to the women that I've worked with and the men that I've worked with, all the clients that I've worked with this knowing of, this isn't me. This is a young part of me that didn't get the nurturing and the love and the presence that she needed. And there's something that I can do about it. Because I know better as an adult. I know I don't want to, as an example, have this victim mentality or have this codependent tendency. But it's just a part of me that's likely very young that is subconsciously driving these behaviors. And again, I can do something about it. So what is the doing? As in anything that we want to change, the doing starts with awareness. So that means, in this example, having the awareness that this inner child concept is a thing, remembering that these responses that are coming through you are coming through a part of you that is frozen at the maturity of, let's say, a 3-year-old. So acknowledging that, acknowledging what the behavior is, how does it show up for you? Where does your inner child come out? Is it in the desperate energy? Is it in helplessness? Is it in going into control, right? All of these behaviors are just seeking safety, seeking to get a need met. So first we have the awareness. This is how this behavior shows up for me. There's this concept of inner child. I feel like they're linked. Perfect. That is level 1. Level 2 is starting to identify what need am I trying to get met here in this response. So if the response is to collapse, to feel helpless or like a victim, then chances are the need that's not being met there is probably some flavor of needing to feel supported, needing to feel held, needing to feel contained, needing to feel validated. It might show up differently for you, but when we can address, okay, what is this need? Then we know what medicine or what type of nurturing our system actually needs to come back into safety. And this is where the concept of reparenting comes in, which is very hand in hand with the concept of inner child. So for the parts of us that are in their inner child reaction, in their survival response reaction, in their temper tantrum immature reaction, that part of us needs a conscious, present, compassionate, loving presence. I know I already said the word presence, but adult basically. And that's who you are now. You are an adult that is a resource, that does have a deeper understanding, that does have a connection to yourself and knowing about the world that your inner child doesn't have. And one of the most unexplainable, intangible parts of this whole conversation is that these layers of our psyche sometimes don't have the awareness of what reality actually is, right? They're stuck in this experience of needing to be in a survival response, of fearing whatever it might be, of being overwhelmed by things that actually logically shouldn't overwhelm you anymore, right? So there's this disconnect between what your adult mind knows and what your subconscious is experiencing. So to state that again more simply, your inner child might literally not understand what your life is because they are so caught up in fears from the past. So we have to do this work to sort of connect with the inner child within us and show her, hey, this is what I have now. This is what is available to us. This is what reality is. And sometimes just doing that through meditation, through journaling, through a guided practice, you can unlock and shift so much in your subconscious. It's actually wild. And this is why it's been so profound in my healing journey, why I bring it in with all of my clients. And also why there is a guided practice for this within the Becoming Secure community in school that I talk about all the time. So that's in there associated with this episode. Lots of the podcast episodes have guided practices within school that go along with them. So if you go in there for the inner child one, know that there's one for the past episodes as well. As I said, the second level is identifying the need, right? What is the need that's not being met here? What missing need is driving this coping behavior? And then, of course, the third thing is being the parent, reparenting yourself and giving that to yourself. So the need can be anything from patience, presence, compassion, holding. And where this gets tricky is that if we have an anxious attachment tendency, then we tend even more than most people to want our needs to be met from the external world. We spend a lot of our time projecting our energy and our sort of like answers or resources for soothing outside of us. We want to be soothed by someone else being soothed. We want to be soothed by a caretaker directly. This part of us that we don't realize is looking for our mother's attention or our father's attention without us even knowing it. We're looking outside of ourselves. So the self-soothing process, which I talk about in the third episode as one of the key components to feeling more secure within yourself, is also part of the reparenting, right? It's identifying that need and then giving it to yourself in whatever way that makes sense. That might also be play. You might find in this process or going through the guided practice that your inner child wants to play. She wants to dance. She wants to go to tennis lessons. She wants to paint. She wants to rest. She wants to listen to music. She wants to cook. All of these things can actually be so simple and actually easy, but chances are we have another part of us that's resisting. I can't rest. I don't have time to rest. I don't have time to play. That's silly. That's childish. And what we miss is that is the pathway to unlocking what it is you actually want. So let's say you are trying to build a business and you're procrastinating. Might not realize that it's connected, but if your inner child's needs were met, she would stop throwing up that procrastination as a coping mechanism because she feels unsafe. And the safety of our inner child affects all areas of our growth, right? It affects our ability to set boundaries, because if our inner child feels unsafe, she's going to be the one that is afraid of rejection in setting a boundary, right? Part of you knows I'm going to be okay if I communicate this, and even if they get mad, even if they say no, even if they reject me, I'm going to be okay. Part of you knows, but then you go into the moment and your heart's racing and your throat closes up and you feel afraid and you feel like you're, maybe a bad person for setting this boundary. And that's just the inner child that doesn't have the same knowing or maturity that you do. It will also show up in any sort of stretching your edge, like any type of this, get out of the comfort zone concept requires us to stretch our edge to get uncomfortable. And the part that is resisting us doing that is so often our inner child or our inner teenager. It's the same concept. The conversation that you have with that part of yourself might feel different. It's also going to affect your ability to expand your window of tolerance. So our window of tolerance, I forget if I mentioned it in a previous episode, is our ability to stay regulated in the face of real or perceived stress without tipping over into a survival response. So how much sort of sensation or stimulation or stress can your body handle before it goes, oh God, I got to get out of here, flight response, or oh God, I can't handle this, shutdown, freeze response, or this is messed up, I'm mad at you now, fight response, right? It's how much can we hold and keep ourselves regulated before tipping over. And we don't want an infinitely expansive window of tolerance, right? We always need that survival response to help us stay alive, to gauge for danger, to gauge for threats in other people. It's important. But what happens so often is our window of tolerance is so small that the littlest things trigger us into anxiety or overwhelm or shutdown or fear, however it shows up for you. So in this journey of healing, especially when it comes to the nervous system work, what we're trying to do is expand that window of tolerance and our capacity for stress. And it's our inner child that's also going to sabotage that. So by doing this inner child work, we find the parts of us that need soothing, that need a little extra reassurance, a little extra understanding of what reality is like right now, so that we can relax back into our safety, wherever you find that for yourself. What is the anchor here that allows you to stay in your center in the face of things that used to trigger you, right? We're working to heal these triggers and heal these wounds, and that comes through working with our inner child. And when it comes to reparenting, the final piece that's really, really important is to consider that healing, getting the attention of this part of you, the willingness to change, the willingness to soften, the willingness to trust you is going to come from presence and compassion and love, right? It's not going to come from perfectionism, from an inner critic tone, from impatience. That's likely just going to make that child close down or pull away or get even more upset. So you really need to think, how would I have to communicate to a 9-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 1-year-old to hold them in this, to help them feel safe again? And because it is these less matured or immatured parts of us that are generally holding us back from showing up in the world in the way that we want to, whatever it is, if you want to be more open or loving or warm or feel safe with people or creative or risk-taking, whatever it is that you're working with, it's the immatured parts of you or the parts that are in a survival response that are resisting, right? But now you're going through this process. You've identified what it is. You've identified the need. You are getting the need met for yourself. And then you're going to need to take a different action. So that's where you choose to move towards the thing that you have thus far been held back from, or show up in the world or direct your energy in a way that you haven't before. And that's going to feel a little vulnerable, right? There's a little bit of a risk there when we take down the wall that the inner child or the survival response has potentially put up. When we dial it down and ask our inner child to trust us and let us lead, there is a bit of a vulnerability there. So something to consider is, after trying something different, setting a boundary, communicating different, asking for what you want, whatever your edge is, reminder to take care of yourself, to tend to the part of your inner child that now does feel a little bit exposed and may want to take that boundary back or curl up a little bit. There's something in this space called a vulnerability hangover, which is sometimes this, exactly what it sounds like a, oh God, that was a lot. It feels big in my nervous system. And that's okay. This is what it is, to stretch your edges, to heal, to show up in a different way. We're not just going to shift from being deep in our anxious attachment tendencies and behaviors to all of a sudden being this fearlessly confident person. There's going to be growing pains in the middle of that, which is I've done the self-soothing work. I've taken care of what I need. I know what I might need in the future. I'm more clear on my boundaries. So now I'm going to feel myself in the world a different way. I'm going to communicate in a different way, like I said. And sometimes there's a little bit of pushback and uncomfortability. So the final piece is to really take care of yourself after that, knowing that that's where a lot of the nurturing work also has to happen in order to create safety. We went out, we did something different, and we're still safe. We're still okay. So that is my share on the inner child and what it is and how it works and how to ultimately work with and heal your inner child. As I said, there's a beautiful, deep, most likely emotional, guided somatic practice, guided healing practice in the Becoming Secure community, which is on School. There's a link in the show notes. And that will allow you to really drop in, to be guided into connecting to this part of you. And it's just so, so beautiful what comes of these sessions. Like I said, it's almost always emotional to meet these parts of ourselves, but these inner child layers within us, you might again meet a teenage part of you or a toddler part or a middle-aged part of you, like a 10-year-old, they always have so much information for us. They have things that they want us to hear and things that they want to share with us and definitely needs. And it's just so, so beautiful and powerful every time. I don't have a better word other than powerful. And such a useful tool. So even if you were to go into the membership and only use this tool and use it 4 times over the course of a month, I trust that would be deeply profound. And you already know that there are so many other tools in there, so many other guided healing meditations and videos and the deepest journal prompts you have ever seen. So I know that it's a wealth of information and practices, and of course you have direct access to me in that community as well, and we're always in discussion about what's coming up or whatever the practice was for the week. There's new content every week, and you get access to everything that I've ever published from the past weeks before. So it's honestly just getting more valuable week by week. And the quiz that I mentioned at the start of the episode is in there as well. So if you want to find out which attachment style type you are, which anxious attachment archetype you are, then that is in the show notes as well. I deeply hope to meet with you and connect with you inside the Becoming Secure membership. And until then, I will wish you well and talk to you in an episode soon. Bye-bye.